Welcome. Vandana Shiva has an extensive history of human rights activism, and the subject of this podcast covers her work to free farmers, largely in India, of their legal bindings to seed-providing companies like Monsanto. Additionally, she dives into her work to sustain a plethora of different seed types, with the hope of sustaining human life, even in dire circumstances. Take a listen.
This is a Religica production. Religica.
Vandana, could you say a little bit about, sort of how you got into this? Where did you start? What was...
Well, I was born in the mountains. So it was kind of what shaped my consciousness.
Yeah.
And then in 1972, I was coming to Canada to do my PhD in the foundations of quantum theory.
Mm-hmm.
So I was coming here, I wanted to visit the favorite forests and streams, and the forest was gone and the stream was gone. And that day I said, my gosh, we can be so destructive.
Now this was the forest and stream you were visiting was back in India?
Yeah.
So you
I
went
wanted
back?
No, I didn't go back. Before leaving, I wanted to carry it in my heart and in my mind. So the last thing I did before coming to Canada was visit my favorite forest and stream, and it wasn't there. And then talking in the dhabas, in these little tea shops we have, they mentioned that, but now there's hope because the Chipko movement has started. So my ecological consciousness begins with birth, but my ecological activism begins with Chipko in the 70s. There was no discipline called ecology or environment in that time. And then in the 70s, partly as a result of Chipko, partly as a result of Stockholm, agencies started to get created, and there weren't that many people who were doing the work. So we started to get tapped as experts, and I was asked to do a study on mining in our valley on the basis of my work as a volunteer for Chipko. With a 6-month study, we stopped the mining in my valley. And because it was my home, I accepted it and I came back. And when I realized, I said, with 6-month study, if you can save entire valleys, then I should be working independently to serve nature and community. And I created the Research Foundation for Science, Technology and Ecology. Then the United Nations noticed my work on ecology and asked me to do a 5-year program on conflicts over resources. Where were the conflicts growing from?
Conflicts over resources in the world?
Yes. But of course, because I was in India, I focused on India, but I would travel to China, I traveled to Africa. But I'm not unrealistic. I don't parasite on others' work. Yeah. I like to do my own work. So I like to be in the community about which I'm talking. And I like to do participatory research to be authentic. So the basic research was in India, but the conceptual research was global. And it was part of a massive program called Peace and Global Transformation.
Through the United Nations?
Through the United Nations University. And that was from 82 to 87. Middle of it in 84, the violence in Punjab erupted, which is the big discussion among the Sikhs of this country still. There was the tragedy, accident, genocide, whatever you call it, in Bhopal, where a pesticide plant leaked. And according to local people, 7,000 people died. According to official statistics, much less. And children are still being born deformed. So just those two, the Punjab and Bhopal, forced me to tell the UN there's something going on here. It's not in the typical sense of conflict over a river. It's not a typical sense of conflict over water, but it is a conflict over development models. And I want to study it, and they accepted. So I did a lot of research, and half the time when I would be traveling to Punjab, I had to cancel my trip because the highways were blocked, because a bus had been blown up in a bomb. I was taking a train. Trains were cancelled. Train had been blown up. And it was in the middle of all of this that I did the work which got published as The Violence of the Green Revolution. And that then became the reason I shifted to looking at agriculture. And because of that book, we're in a strange world where there's something called experts. You write a book, you become an expert. You live a life, you have no expertise. Women are not experts, peasants are not experts, carpenters don't know woodwork, fishermen don't know the ocean. Oh, and that ridiculousness of a social division of knowledge, I call it an epistemological apartheid, I became very open to recognizing it was happening with Chipko, because I knew the women knew more about the forest than the forest officers, who were saying you're blocking development. But women knew 5,000 species. The forest officers knew the 2 commercial species to be exploited. So I knew their different knowledge systems. Because of that one book, I became an expert in agriculture. And I started to get invited to conferences. And my life has been a life of learning, of humility. And I would go to conferences, not because I thought I was an expert, but because I thought I could learn something more about this beast that was doing more damage to the world than anything else.
It's commercial agriculture.
Industrial commercial agriculture, based on chemicals.
And is that, okay. And is that the case in India also? Because in India, it seems like little plots.
Our plots are little, but Punjab was devastated. The violence that erupted in Punjab was because it was the first experiment of introducing chemicals by force. It was imposed through all kinds of conditionalities. And it was given the name Green Revolution. And the Green Revolution was given a Nobel Peace Prize. And that's what triggered the question in my mind. I said, the Nobel Peace Prize is given to what happened to Punjab as creating, through chemicals, prosperity and peace. And yet the chemicals have left a devastated land. And that's the reason I wanted to study the United Nations. And at this meeting, I was invited to in 1987, because of that book, the handful of agrochemical industry was there. And the UN was there. It was in Geneva. And a part of it was in a retreat just outside Geneva. It was called a Conference on the Laws of Life on the Emerging Biotechnologies and what they mean. In 1987, this is before commercialization of a GMO. Commercialization begins in 1992. Yeah. The first GMO seeds get sold in America in 1992. But 1987, they were already looking towards it. And there were 3 things they said. First, they said, we are too small. So SIBA was very small, and Sandoz was very small. They had to get together to become Novartis. But they were still very small. They had to join Astra and Zeneca to become Syngenta. So Bayer was very small, and the concentration has carried on till today. And now Bayer has bought Monsanto, and Dow bought Union Carbide, which caused the damage in Bhopal, and it has merged with DuPont. And Syngenta has merged with ChemChina. So you have a cartel of 3. I call them the poison cartel.
And just for the listeners' sake, you're talking about a series of mergers of commercial agricultural companies doing fertilizer and things like that.
No, I'll take you a little further back. I call them the poison cartel because this group of companies, led by Bayer at that time, which became a cartel in Hitler's Germany, it was called IG Farben. And they are the ones who evolved the chemicals to kill people and gas them to death in the concentration camps. The origins of our pesticides are the gases that killed people in the concentration camps. These were the companies that didn't exist before and were born out of war and killing and genocide. Their skill was how to kill efficiently. And when the war ended, they should have folded up. The IG Farben Nuremberg trial should have been a total closure to this poison route, but they came right back in the post-war era and mutated their chemicals for killing, which were known as war chemicals, now into agrichemicals. And these agrichemicals then were the basis of the Green Revolution, which lasted till the 80s, but it was failing. So in 1987 at this meeting, they're talking about, we're too small, so we got to get bigger. We're not making enough money, so we must make more money. We're not making enough money from chemicals, now we must marry chemicals to seeds and genetic engineering and GMOs, genetically modified organisms, which are just 2 categories now, Roundup Ready seeds and BT seeds.
It sounds like the trajectory you're going on was seeing the complicity of the cause of these multinational corporations using these technologies to actually damage agriculture and people.
And own life.
And what?
Own life, because they said so clearly, we have to use GMOs and produce GMOs because the only way to increase our profits. Because using GMOs, we can say we are creating life and we are inventors of seed and we make money two ways. We collect royalties from the farmers, but a patent makes it illegal for anyone else to use what's patented. So we can make it illegal for farmers to save seeds. And this way, every farmer, every season will have to come to us to buy seed. And having worked with rural communities in India, having worked on biodiversity since my days of Chipko, my instant response was, I'm terribly sorry, but you don't invent the seed. You are not creators. And I joke now and say, if you get too puzzled about intellectual property rights and this and that, just remember GMO for Monsanto means God move over. They then went along the third point they said is, and it's not enough for us to do this in the countries where farmers are already dependent on commercial seed, which is Europe and America. We've got to take it to the third world because that's where our profits will lie. And for that, we need to bring this into an international trade treaty and make it impossible for farmers to have their own seed, which is how they introduced into the WTO, into the TRIPS and GATT, the Intellectual Property Agreement. And they thought forever they have a monopoly. But because I was there at the 87 meeting, and I really believe grace and, the universe takes you to these moments to be of service for the larger good. And so these three things, they said, shifted the trajectory of my life and made me a seed saver and made me start Navdanya, the movement for seed saving, which means 9 seeds. Nav can be 9, and Dan can be the seed, or Nav can be new, and Dan can be the gift. Yeah. So I see it as a symbol of diversity, the highest 9. But in Indian cosmology, the 9 is linked to the 9 planets, the Navgraha. It's linked to the diversity in the field, and it's linked to the diversity in our body. And as a new gift, it's linked to keeping life and seeds in the commons and not allowing its privatization through patenting.
And let me check if I'm correct, that I've read that this is a very, very human issue. I mean, small farmers will get into the green revolution rut, then they have to borrow money to buy seeds, and there's a lot of suicides because people just can't do it, right?
300,000 in India since Monsanto entered.
That's crazy.
It's crazy. So I started to save seeds, created community seed banks, started to work with the government. We managed to get amendments in the international law. And in India, I was invited by government to help write laws. And I worked with Parliament to make sure when we were asked to amend our patent law, because of the TRIPS and WTO and GATT, we put an exclusion, Article 3J, that plants, animals, and seeds are not inventions. And therefore there can be no patent on it. It's an issue Monsanto is not giving up. We've got the law. They've lost every case. Now they're trying to challenge the law. On the 14th, when I go back to India,
oh my God.
I'll be in the Supreme Court dealing with these issues. So we worked on the ground to build the alternative. I worked with law, and I'm still working on both planes. Now, quite clearly, preventing the patenting of life is avoiding technological hubris. And for me, that's my basic work in the defense of the integrity of creation.
Yeah.
But having worked on saving the seed, we started to do organic farming. We started to create fair trade networks. And now just the act of saving seed has led to ecological systems of agriculture, non-violent systems, fair and just systems of agriculture, where we can, if the world farmed with biodiversity and integrity of seed and freedom of the farmers to have their seed, we could be growing food for 2 times the world's population. They keep saying we'll be 8 billion and 9 billion. Even if we were 14 billion, the earth has enough if we worked in harmony with her. The second is we are now realizing that the chronic disease epidemic has only one place. If you got to get rid of malnutrition, we got to get rid of diseases. It's only by growing healthy food. You only grow healthy food when you give back to the earth. You give back to the soil, then the soil creates healthy plants create healthy food. And that's now a scientifically established link. We've done a manifesto on food for health. I've done a book on food and health, annam, which in Sanskrit, annam is food, and in our Upanishads and in the Mahabharata, it is said, annam Brahman. Creation is food, because food is what is the currency of life.
So you've been working on this global legal level having to do with non-patentability of genetic food and food technologies and stuff, and then you've also been working on an organic level in terms of encouraging farmers and building the seed banks and teaching people how to do it.
But
India in
but the
particular.
international level and the legal level, of course, one is ensuring in the WTO these laws of imposing ownership of life, and the arrogance of Monsanto's being creators of life was one. But I was very active in the drafting of the Convention on Biological Diversity. I was advising my government because 2 treaties came out of Rio. One was the Convention on Biological Diversity, which is, I would call it, the integrity of
Rio
creation.
WTO?
Yes, not WTO, Rio's Earth Summit.
Oh, okay.
Earth Summit in 92.
Yeah.
So one is the Convention on Biological Diversity to protect species diversity, and the second is the Climate Agreement, UNFCCC, UN Framework Convention on. So those 2 legally binding treaties, one on climate, one on biodiversity, I had a role in that period of shaping these international laws. So both resisting the laws of greed and creating the international laws for the protection of the planet. I've done both those works,
Yeah, okay. Got it.
as well as on the ground, the real stuff to build an alternative.
Can you say a little bit about the scale of, and how do I pronounce it,
Navdanya.
in terms of, how many people, how many farms, I don't know, just
Yeah, so we've trained more than 1 million farmers. We've saved 4,000 varieties of rice. India used to have 200,000 varieties of rice. We've saved 250 varieties of wheat, 70 varieties of kidney beans alone, all the pulses, all the millets, which we call forgotten foods.
Would it be correct that you're helping them sort of break out of the cycle of being dependent on these Monsanto seeds and get back into growing things and then being able to reuse those seeds?
Where Monsanto seeds have entered, it is about breaking out.
Yeah.
And I'm very happy to tell you that Monsanto's only crop that was allowed in India was BT cotton, a cotton where a pesticide is built into the plant. And it failed. It didn't control the pest. But it destroyed the pollinators, it's destroyed the soil, and it's got the farmer into deep debt because Monsanto increased the price of seed by 80,000%. It used to be 5 rupees a kilogram.
So the
before,
farmer said, oh, this is a good deal.
And no, they were never told the price. It was always on credit.
Yeah, sure.
And so farmers got into debt, and when they came to take the land, because then they filled in, the credit was against land, the farmer never offered the land. Yeah. The farmer was cheated all the way.
Oh, yeah.
So suicide started. And when the suicide started, I went down to the cotton area, which happens to be Gandhi's area.
That's right.
And I said, Gandhi had turned the spinning wheel
Sure. He was very much
on the freedom.
Yeah,
and I said, now cotton has been made the fabric of slavery. We've got to make it a fiber of freedom again. So I started to save cotton seeds, started to distribute them, started to train farmers in organic. And in the villages where we work, in the central India, the latest report I got from the field was 60% decline in BT cotton. And I'm just hoping that in the next few years we'll bring it to zero by building the alternative. But in the places where Monsanto seeds aren't there, like I said, it's only BT cotton. So all other seeds, in all the other regions, we are basically encouraging farmers to not give up their seed sovereignty, because India is 2 worlds in one. It's the India of freedom and sovereignty and the small farms and the biodiversity, and it's the India of Monsanto taking over. Both are sitting right next to each other. Yeah. And we have to do both the strategies. Protect the indigenous and resist the empire.
You have been listening to Religica. Visit us at www.religica.org.